Welcome to More Nevuchim, our lecture on Guide for the Perplexed. I think we're up to 116 or 117. Anyway, when I say page numbers, for those that are watching the recordings, I'm referring to this book, the Shlomo Penis edition, volume 2. That's what I'll be reading from. I'm right now on page 518 in section 3 of the guide, page 29. The second paragraph, which starts, I shall now return to my purpose. That's where we're up to. Now, the Rambam in this chapter is giving us a historical lecture on what the beliefs of the Sabians were. And the Sabians, as we described last time, is Rambam's catchphrase for which refers to the idolaters, the pagans that existed prior to the giving of the Torah. So the pagans that were around prior to monotheism taking hold over the general population. So, and as we pointed out last time, in order to describe the law, the Rambam is describing now the reasons for the mitzvot, the reasons behind the rules and that Hashem gave us. And he's discussing the reasons for the laws against Avodah Zarah and why God was so strict and so I don't know what the right word, so strong in his condemnation of paganism and how we have to uproot it and how brutal the uprooting is described in the Torah that we're required to do. And in order to do that, the Rambam had to go and explain, well, what is this paganism? What is this, what the Sabians believed? So in order to understand the Torah's laws, he went to the milieu, he went to the history, he went to the books, read all about what the Sabians were like. And from there, he was able to understand, okay, well, if the Sabians were this bad, now I can understand the Torah's laws. And I pointed out last time, and I'm probably going to say it again several times tonight, that this approach is not specifically Rambam's research into Sabians, because Rambam's research into ancient pagan practices would pale in comparison to a modern anthropology textbook and the knowledge that we have on ancient civilizations and their various religions. So the point is not really to appreciate Rambam's analysis of pagan practices and beliefs. The point is to appreciate his method, right? His method of, if I want to understand the Torah and why the Torah gives me these laws, now let me look into the history. Let's look into what the world was like when the Torah was given. And then maybe I can understand. I'm going to pause my this for a second. I have the door open to my dryer and it's really loud. So give me 1 second. Hold on. Good. Well, yeah, even if you couldn't hear it, to me it was loud. So anyway, so so it's the method, right? And it's a method which I don't know if I'm 100% accurate in saying that the Rambam was the first to employ it. There may be, but he's certainly the first major figure of Jewish philosophy to understand the mitzvah based on something like this. There's exceptions to that rule, but it's certainly true to say that he's extremely influential. And having the Rambam as a guide, it allows us today to do similar types of research when trying to understand the Torah, and when trying to understand the Torah, to do archaeological research, historical research, study the language of the time, study, in order to understand what the Torah is doing. And that's really what is important for us to get from this chapter. Although there are a lot of other points which we're going to get to today, that even though his research into paganism was limited to what he had access to, some of the points that he brings out are very relevant and important no matter what. So I shall now return to my purpose. I'm going to read the second paragraph on page 518 and say that the meaning of many of the laws became clear to me, and their causes became known to me through my study of the doctrines, opinions, practices, and cult of the Sabian. This is really saying what I just said. I understood the Torah better when I understood and read about the cults and the practices and doctrines of the Sabians. As you will hear, when I explain the reasons for the commandments that are considered to be without cause, I'm going to start explaining to you later on many of the reasons for the mitzvot, the reasons for the commandments that seem to have no reason or purpose. And this is an introduction which we're going to find in farther chapters. It will make sense to you when you understand the historical context within which they were given. Okay? I shall mention to you the books from which all that I know about the doctrines and opinions of the Sabians will become clear to you, so that you will know for certain that what I say about the reasons for these laws is correct. And I'm going to mention to you, I'm going to tell you the research that I did, the Rambam says. I'm going to give you a reading list of the books that I pulled out of the Cairo library, right, in order to come up with my understanding of the Sabians, right? I didn't just pull this out of my hat. I did the research, and the Rambam is going to quote for us those books shortly. So you can trust me, Rambam is saying. I read the books. I know what it was about. I know what the world was like when the Torah was given. So here we go. The most important book about this subject, this the Rambam quoted before, and I talked a little bit about it last time, so I won't talk too much detail this time, is the Nabatean Agriculture, translated by Ibn Washiyah. Now, I did mention last time, I'll say again, that this Ibn Washiyah wrote it as if it was translated from the ancient Chaldean, right? Which it was actually not. It was invented by him, but it was him writing about what the beliefs of the Sabians were. So when the Rambam read it, at least, he understood this to be a genuine book written by the pre-Islamic Sabians, right? In the future chapter, I shall let you know why the Sabians treated their doctrines and agriculture in the same work. And just the FYI, the agriculture was obviously the underpinning of life, of human life and civilization. Without agriculture, civilization wouldn't have existed. So most of their doctrines of Avodah Zarah, of paganism, revolved around having a bountiful harvest. This book is filled with the ravings of the idolaters and with notions to which the souls of the vulgar incline and by which they are captivated, right? So it's full of all kinds of crazy notions, but they're notions which simple people, right, are interested in and get captivated by. What kind of notions? I mean, the actions of talismans. People get captivated by the idea that I can wear a rabbit's foot or something around my neck and have good luck. Or I can use a talisman and somehow achieve something, right? And somehow that protects me. I can, and you can only imagine what the Rambam would have to say about many of those talismans that have percolated into Judaism. And it's no secret that the Rambam was very deeply against those ideas, right? But he understands that common folk want these kind of things. They want to know that I can wear this bracelet and somehow be protected from the evil eye, right? Practices with a view to causing spirits to descend. That if I do this, then the spirits will come from upstairs, or demons and ghouls living in deserts. In this book are also included extraordinary ravings laughed at by the intelligent, which are thought to depreciate the manifest miracles through which the people of the earth know that there is a deity governing the people of the earth. The bottom line is that these silly beliefs cause people to denigrate the idea. When you start to believe, right, that talismans work and that you can get demons and ghosts and goblins and whatever it is that you're professing, it ruins people's appreciation of the true God. It ruins the people's appreciation of knowing that thou mayest know that the earth is God's and that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. In other words, the real miracles of creation. When you think magically, you ruin your ability to appreciate what the world is really like. The incredible beauty and grandeur of the world that is run by God falls apart when you think that magical amulets are somehow ruling the world and that somehow ghosts and goblins and demons can be called up or down by various incantations, right? Accordingly, it is related there about Adam, the first man, that he recounts in his book, that in India there is a tree whose branches, if taken and thrown on the earth, move, crawling as snakes do. And also that there is another tree there whose root has a human form. This root may be heard to growl and emit isolated words. He also narrates that if a man takes a leaf of an herb whose description is given and puts it against his breast, he becomes hidden from people and is not seen, some invisibility cloak of sorts, where he comes in and goes out. Or if this herb is used in fumigations under the open sky, people hear a sound and fearsome voices in the atmosphere while the smoke rises. There are many such fables in this book, told in the course of setting forth information about marvels in plants and the properties of agriculture. In this way, the miracles are criticized and the suggestion made that they are worked by means of tricks. right? So the idea being that the true miracles of nature are minimized when you make it into things being ruled by spirits and demons and magic and so on. So the true grandeur of nature is covered up and taken away when one looks at the world in this magical way. In one of the fables figuring in that book, it is mentioned that an Althea bush, which was one of the asherot that they used. That's the Asherah is a tree that the Torah repeats and Tanakh repeats over and over again. It's a tree that was worshipped. Exactly what it was. The scholars talk about it a lot. It's not the point right here, but the bottom line is that in this book, one of their Asherot, as I have let you know, remained for 12,000 years in Nineveh. That it quarreled with a mandragora, which is a mandrake, because of the latter's wanting to take its place. That the individuals who used to receive prophetic revelation from that tree were deprived of the revelation for a while after the interval of time. It informed him by such a, I'm reading this quickly on purpose. If you're really interested in these legends, you can read it more carefully. That it had been preoccupied with the quarrel with the mandrake and ordered him to write to the Chaldeans, asking him to judge between them and pronounce which of them was better for or more frequently utilized in their magic. It's a long fable, Rambam says, from which, if you examine it, you may draw inferences concerning the intellect and the sciences of the people of those times, right? The people that believed in those days believed in these magical things, these magical qualities of plants, right? As opposed to appreciating the true nature, right? Such were the sages of Babylon that are referred to in those dark times. For these were the religious beliefs upon which they were brought up. They were raised in a world of magic, of demons, of sorcery, of talismans, ghouls, and spirits, etc. If the belief in the existence of the deity were not generally accepted at present, in the Rambam's time, by that time, monotheism was accepted. If that belief was not to such an extent in religious communities, our days in these times would be even darker than that epoch. Had we continued along that path, it would have gotten worse and worse and worse, right? However, their darkness is of different kinds, right? I am, however, returning to our subject. So go look there if you want to read about all this stuff. But that's the kind of milieu, that's the kind of world it was in those days. That's what they believed. In that book, it is related that in an individual from among the prophets of idolatry, a prophet named Tammuz, right? Tammuz, we're familiar with as the name of the fourth month in the Hebrew calendar. The Torah never uses that term, right? The Torah talks about the months in numbers. We inherited these months from the Persians, and many of them are originally idolatrous names. Called upon a king to worship the 7 planets and the 12 signs of the zodiac. Rambam is slowly zeroing in on a point here. Before, he was just trying to impress us with the craziness of the ideas. But now he's zeroing in on something, right? This prophet was talking about, it was teaching that we need to worship the stars and the constellations. Thereupon the king killed him in an abominable manner. It is narrated that on the night of his death, all the statues from the various countries of the earth assembled in the temple of Babylon near the great golden statue, which was the statue of the sun. This statue was suspended between heaven and earth, and it came to a stop in the middle of the temple while all the other statues surrounded it. Then it began to eulogize, the statue began to eulogize Tammuz the prophet and to relate what had happened to him. By the way, I turned to page 520 now, in case I forgot to mention. And lamented during the whole of the night. In the morning, however, the statues flew away and returned to their temples in the various countries of the earth. And this became an enduring traditional custom to lament and weep over Tammuz on the first day of the month of Tammuz. The women weep over him and eulogize him. Consider then and understand and see what were the opinions of the people in those times. For this story of Tammuz is a very ancient one among the Sabians. And from this book, you will understand most of the ravings, practices, and festivals of the Sabians. So if you want to read that book, you'll get a really good understanding of what their pagan practices were like. The key point there, and he's going to come back to it soon, is Tammuz teaching the worship of the sun and the stars and the constellations, right? That by worshiping the sun and the stars, through worshiping the idols that represent them, one will bring goodness upon the earth. And if you don't worship the stars as Tammuz taught us to do, Tammuz, that prophet of the idols, taught them to do, then you will suffer, right? Then agriculture will suffer. That's the key. Rambam is going to come back to that in a minute. That's why he brought that story. As for the story they tell about Adam and the serpent and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, now I just started the second paragraph on 520, a story that also alludes to unusual clothing. Now, I think the Rambam is deliberately picking notions that have origins in the story of Bereshit, of Genesis, the clothing that God gave Adam and Eve after they ate from the tree of knowledge, right? The tree of knowledge of good and evil, the serpent, right? Take great care not to be confused in your intellect. Now, I want you to listen real carefully to this paragraph because this is a very, very important one, okay? Don't be careful not to be confused in such a way as to have the notion that what they say is a thing that has ever happened to Adam or to someone else. Don't think that their stories in their books is something that ever actually happened. Now, remember, a lot of what they say in these stories is what we actually find in Genesis. Hold that thought for a minute, okay? For it is by no means a story concerning something real. The story that they quote that incorporates parts of Genesis is not talking about anything real. With very little reflection, it will become clear to you that all they set forth in this fable is absurd, and that it is a story that they put out after the promulgation of the Torah. They heard the Torah, and they reiterated that story. For when the Torah had become generally known among the religious communities, and they heard the external meaning of the account of the beginning, and they read the external meaning of Bereshit, right? Taking the whole of it according to its external meaning, they concocted the story in order that inexperienced people should listen to it and be so deceived as to think that the world is eternal and that the story described in the Torah happened the way they tell it, right? In other words, right, taking Bereshit literally, taking Genesis literally is exactly what the idol worshippers did, which was their mistake. And I want to remind you, lest you think that this isn't what the Rambam means. Remember what he said in part 2, chapter 29, and I'm going to read it to you again. And this is very important because the Rambam is reiterating this there. The Rambam not only says in 229 that I'm about to read to you, this is at the bottom of 346 if you have it in front of you, right? Not everything mentioned in the Torah concerning the account of the beginning is to be taken in its external sense, as the simple people imagine. For if the matter were such, the men of knowledge would not have been chary of divulging knowledge regarding to it, and so on. He says, for the external sense of these texts leads either to a grave corruption of the imagination. If you take Bereshit Genesis literally, it leads to a grave corruption of the imagination and to giving vent to evil opinions with regard to the deity, or to an absolute denial of the action of the deity, or to disbelief in the foundations of the Torah. Taking Bereshit as a literal story according to the Rambam, and he says it explicitly there, and he expounds on it over here, leads one to corrupt beliefs and eventually will lead you away from believing in God. Now let that sink in for a moment. I don't know how many times you may have been told that Bereshit, some people that read Bereshit as a literal story of the Rambam, not just says that you don't have to take it literally, but adamantly insists that if you do take it literally, then you're guilty of what the idolaters are doing, right? The Torah does not mean to say a story that is meant to be taken literally. And so I think I said it strongly enough, right? Bereshit is not meant to be literal according to the Rambam, and adamantly, strongly so, okay? So as you have, even though a man like you does not have to have his attention drawn to this point, someone like you reading this book, you should know this already, right? Shouldn't even have to point this out to you, right? As you have already acquired such sciences, you have learned enough wisdom, enough science to know as will prevent your mind from becoming attached to the fables of the Sabians and the ravings of the Chastians and the Chaldeans, who are devoid of all science that is truly a science. They're devoid of any real knowledge. They're stuck in these fantasies and nonsense, right? I have warned against this in order to safeguard others, for the multitude frequently inclined to regarding fables as the truth. People, the simple public often looks at fables and assume that they're telling true stories, okay? Among these books, there is also the book, and then remember, he promised us that he was going to tell us about all the books that he read, so we know that he's well read on the subject of paganism. Don't think that I'm blasting paganism because I don't know about it. I know about it, the Rambam told us, right? Among those books is also the book of Alus Machos, whatever, that is ascribed to Aristotle, but he cannot have written it. Other books tell us about, these are all books, some of which are actually still extant. Also books concerning talismans, like the book of Tumtum. Tumtum was a supposed Hindu writer who may or may not have actually existed, but among the Islamic culture of the time, his books were quoted, and they were usually used to make fun of the Hindu silly beliefs in pagan gods, right? So the book, whether or not it was actually a Hindu book, I have no idea. Probably not. But regardless, that's what it was. And that's a book that the Rambam had access to. The book Al-Sarb and the book of the degrees of the sphere and the forms appearing in each of these degrees, and also a book concerning talismans that is likewise attributed to Aristotle, a book ascribed to Hermes, and the book written by Ishak al-Sabi on the defense of the religious community of the Sabians, and the big book of the same author concerning the laws of the Sabians, the details of their religion, their festivals, sacrifices, prayers, and other matters belonging to their religion. All the books that I have mentioned to you are books of idolatry that have been translated into Arabic. These are the ones Rambam says I was able to read because they were translated into Arabic so I could read them, right? But there's no doubt that they are a very small part of this literature if compared to the writings that have not been translated and are not even extant. There probably were hundreds more books of the Sabians that I don't have access to. Either no one does or I don't, because they're never translated. However, the books extant among us today contain an exposition of the greatest part of the opinions and practices of the Sabians. Some of the latter are generally known at present in the world. I mean the buildings of temples, the setting up in them of images made of cast metal and stone, the building of altars, and the offering up upon them of animal sacrifices or various kinds of food, the institution of festivals, the gatherings for prayer, and various kinds of worship in those temples, in which they locate highly venerated places that are called by them the temple of the intellectual forms, as well as setting up of images on the high mountains, and so on and so forth, the veneration of the Asherah, setting up of monumental stones, so those are matzevot, and other matters of which you will learn in the books to which I have drawn your attention. If you want to know about it, read all about it. Okay, the knowledge of these opinions and practices is a very important chapter in the exposition of the reasons for the commandments. In order to truly understand the commandments as I go through them with you, Rambam says, you need to understand what the environment was like and what the people were believing in and living and practicing at the time that the Torah was given. And that's why you have to read all of these books. If you want to know to understand the Torah, you have to understand what the Torah was coming up against, right? Or trying to teach us away from. For the foundation of the whole of our Torah and the pivot around which it turns consists in the effacement of these opinions from the mind and of these monuments from existence. The point of the Torah is to get rid of this kind of thinking, to get rid of this kind of magical thinking, this belief in spirits and ghouls and goblins, right? But rather, the Torah wants to lead us in the true direction of God with respect to their effacement from the minds. It says, lest your heart be deceived, and so on, whose heart turneth away this day, and so on. And with respect to their effacement from existence, in other words, I want to lead you in the right direction, and I want to get you out of the wrong direction. You shall break down their altars and hew down their groves, etc. These two purposes are reiterated in a number of passages. For this is the first intention extending over the whole of the law. This is the first main reason for the Torah. As is made known to us by the sages, may their memory be blessed, in their transmitted commentary on his dictum, may they be exalted. Even all that the Lord has commanded you by the hand of Moshe, for they say, herefrom you may learn that everyone who professes idolatry disbelieves in the Torah in its entirety, whereas he who disbelieves in idolatry professes the Torah in its entirety. Cognize this, think of this. So here we have a couple of points that I want to make, and then I'll stop for questions before we go to the next chapter. But that concludes chapter 29. The bottom line, right, is they were stuck in all these magical thinking, which disabled them from seeing the true beauty of nature. When you start explaining things with ghouls and goblins, and this is something that's very relevant today, if you believe that the world is being ruled by magical powers, then you miss out on what the beauty of how the world really works, which is so much more miraculous, right? This is an important point. If you think that by doing silly things or doing incantations, that somehow controls the world, then you're missing the beauty of what actually makes the world work, which is so much more beautiful and leads us to an appreciation of God. right? That's a point that the Rambam made. The other point is is how this taking the stories of Bereshis and making them literal can also lead one astray. And this, I emphasized that a lot when I read it, so I'm not gonna try to push it again too hard. But it's so important to understand that if you think about things that are meant to be metaphors, and you try to think that they're literal, that they're actual, that they're historical, you're in danger of making a mockery of the Torah, right? But if you look at it and understand its truths in the metaphor, and you understand how the lessons that are trying to be taught, then you have profound lessons and profound meaning. And then the third idea is that if we understand what the world was thinking at the time, we can understand better the reasons for the mitzvot, the reasons for the Torah, and that chapter 30 really continues on this theme. But I'm going to stop here for comments and questions. But hopefully, we should have a chance to finish 30 tonight. Anyone have anything to say? If not, I'll go on. All right, fine, I'll go on, and please interrupt me if you want to. Chapter 30, right? When you consider these ancient and unhealthy opinions, right, that I just described to you, it will become clear to you. I'm on page 522 for those that lost me at the beginning of chapter 30. That among all men, it was an accepted view that through the worship of the stars, the earth becomes populated and the soil fertile. Now, think about that for a minute. That it's through worship of stars that we get what we need, which is a fertile land so we can grow food and have food to eat, right? They're men of knowledge, as well as the ascetics and men of piety among them, the ones who were dedicated and devoted to their religious beliefs, preached this to the people and taught them that agriculture, on which the existence of man depends, can only be perfected and succeed according to which if you worship the sun and the stars. If you anger them through disobedience, the land will become barren and devastated. There's a fundamental problem here. And the Rambam is not really hiding this. If you think that it's through worship that we get, right? Through worship that we get a land that works, right? And through disobedience that we get a land that does not work for us. There's a fundamental flaw there, right? The Rambam is going to be developing and has been developing until now the idea that keeping the laws of the Torah actually makes the world a better place, right? Remember how he told us the laws of the Torah were designed so that our society should work, right? So that there should be charity, that there should be honesty, and thus result in people that have food to eat and people that get along with each other and people that are healthy, right? The Torah does not work in such a way that it's through worship that we suddenly get bounty, and through disobedience that we through disobedience of God or the gods with lowercase in this instance, that we don't get what we need from the land, right? So in their books, they say that Jupiter had been angry with the wildernesses and the deserts, and that they therefore lacked water and lacked trees and were inhabited by ghouls. They had a very great esteem for the peasants and cultivators of the soil because of their being engaged in cultivating the earth, an occupation that conforms to the will of the stars and pleases them. They said when you cultivate the earth, you get goodwill from the stars because the stars love it when you cultivate the earth, because that's what the stars want. Not because cultivating the earth actually is how you get a better crop yield, which is how the Rambam would explain it, but cultivating the earth makes the powers and the stars and the idols feel good about you, right? The reason why the idolaters had a great esteem for oxen, right? And the Rambam is going to use this to explain certain laws later on. But remember, he's referring to the Hindus that venerate oxen right now. He's going to say it more explicitly later. He's hinting to it now, right? What's the utility for the latter in agriculture? Because the oxen are so important in agriculture. They even said it was not permitted to kill them because force was joined in them to handiness for man in agriculture. The oxen only acted thus and submitted to man. In spite of their force, why would a strong ox listen to me? And I'm a weak guy. The ox could just shove me over, stomp me down, and run away, right? He's doing it because the gods were pleased with their work in agriculture. The oxen are trying to please the gods, right? Inasmuch as these opinions were generally accepted, the idolaters connected idolatry with agriculture. They said that it's idolatry that brings about success in agriculture, the latter being necessary for the subsistence of man and of most animals. Accordingly, the priests of idolatry preached to the people during their assemblies in the temples and fortified in their minds the notion that through the practices of this cult, rains would fall, the trees would bear fruit, and the land would become fertile and populous. That how do we get a fertile land? By worshiping in the temples. Consider what they say in the Nabatean agriculture, in the passage on the vineyard. You will find there the following text. All the ancient sages have said that the prophets have commanded and prescribed to play on musical instruments before the statues during festivals. They said, and they were truthful. Remember, he's quoting now, right, from this book, that the gods were pleased with this and accorded the best reward to those who acted thus. They multiplied the promises concerning this, promising that is a prolongation of life, a warding off of calamities, the disappearance of infirmities, the fertility of the sowing, and the thriving of the fruits. The text of the Sabians continues up to here. That's the end of my quote, Rambam said. Now, inasmuch as these notions were generally accepted, I'm at the second paragraph on 523 now, so that they were regarded as certain, and as God, may he be exalted, wished in his pity for us to efface this error from our minds, and to take away fatigue from our bodies through the abolition of these tiring and useless practices, and to give us the laws, right, the Torah, right, the mitzvot, through the instrumentality of Moshe, our master. So God, in the latter, Moshe informed us that in God's name may he be exalted, that if the stars and the planets were worshipped, their worship would be a cause for rain ceasing to fall. So Moshe came and taught us something. Now, I want to make a point here, and in case you don't believe me, I'm going to quote from the comments in the Goodman-Lieberman version, right? Hold on one second. That even though, as we learned, if you remember in chapter 27 in part 3, right, that this isn't exactly true, right? It doesn't work this way. That so simply that if we pray to, if we commit pagan worship, that suddenly our plants will stop growing, right? Rambam doesn't believe in such a connection that it works automatically that way. Things grow because we plant them and cultivate them, right? So, but Moshe still told us, in order to get us away from such beliefs, right? In their quote, it's a morally and spiritually motivated teaching, although not literally true. And they refer us back to chapter 27, which we can go back to if you want to. But so that if the stars and planets were worshipped, their worship would be a cause for the rain ceasing to fall, the land being devastated and producing nothing, and so on, for the fruit of the trees falling off, and misfortunes attending circumstances, for infirmities falling the bodies, and a shortening of life. If you pray to these idols, that's what you're going to get. Now, it is true on a certain level. What's the level that it's true on? If you ignore the way of the world and you think that by going and praying in the temple, I'm going to get what I need, then you will not have a yield. You will lose your health, or you will have a short life. It's true that if you depend on magic, you won't get anything. So it is true, but it's not true that A equals B, but it is true that if you do A, you're probably going to result in B. I hope that makes sense, right? So these are the intentions of the words of the covenant which the Lord made, and so on. You will find that this intention is reiterated in the whole of the Torah. The Rambam is telling us, what does it mean when it says, if you worship Avodah Zarah, you will suffer, right? God, Moshe is telling us that when it's the Torah. The other prophets tell us that throughout Tanakh. What they're telling us is, if you waste your time on this nonsense, you're going to be hungry, right? Because it's nonsense. I mean that it is a necessary consequence of the worship of the stars that rains will cease to fall, that land will be devastated, circumstances will become bad, that the bodies will suffer from diseases, and that lives will be short. Whereas a necessary consequence of the abandonment of their worship and the adoption of the worship of God. But if you abandon their worship and you follow and do what God said to do, right? Then you will have rainfall, fertility of land, good circumstances, health of the body, and length of the life. This is the contrary of what was preached by the idolaters to the people in order that they worship idols, right? Because the laws of the Torah actually do lead physically, in actuality, to prosperity, to health, because that is the goal of the Torah, right? To, as the Rambam said, lead to a healthy society so that we can have what we need at physical level, so that we can then move on to the next level and bring about spiritual growth, and so on. For the foundation of the Torah consists in putting an end to this opinion and effacing its traces, as we have explained, right? So I'm going to stop here for today, and we can have some comments if anyone has anything to say. But fire away. I open the floor. Nothing. It's just too much. All right.
The Sabians must have been around, what, 1,000 years? I mean, a long civilization for a long time. So how can we say with this kind of certainty that what they were doing was counterproductive? Because they had the Egyptians too, they were idolaters. They lasted 2,000 years.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, you know, they obviously didn't starve all the time because they survived for a long time, so they must have had some success.
Yeah. We only have 79 seconds left according to the Doomsday Clock. So.
Oh yeah. That's but the you know, there's so much here. There's really a lot here, and as we continue, I mean, we could start 31 if you guys want. But if anyone has other comments, 31 is, they're all, everything from now to the end is, the whole book is powerful, of course, but everything from now to the end is like, okay, Jack, I see you have a hand up.
So the reason they survived so long is because they were in an ideal situation. They had the Nile, they had things that would happen no matter whether they did idolatry or not. They just assumed that idolatry kept it going, but obviously they were in a good situation. They were sort of in a sweet spot. And so it was going to happen whether they did that or not. It doesn't mean that idolatry was right or that it was working. There are a lot of things people do and they think it works, but it's not really working. It's just that it happens to occur. And so I think that's how they did it for so long. And then when something bad happened, they obviously felt that they must have not prayed to Jupiter right or something. So, you know, that's sort of the way. And so then they sacrificed a human or something to appease the god or whatever. I mean, that's sort of the way they survive like that and fool people. And like you just said, the common folk many times would just, you know, take that as gospel, and they look to these people who led them to, you know, with false images of what was going on, whether they knew it or not. I don't know if the people that led these situations actually believed in this pagan stuff, or if they just did it to control the population. But nonetheless, I think that is part of what explains that. But my question is about the literal interpretation of the stories of the Bible, and how much, I mean, what do you think? I mean, I know what Rambam thinks, but if you add what Rambam thinks with the general feeling of Judaism as a whole, I mean, where are we now with that?
That's a pretty big question. It really depends on who you ask. There's a very broad range of ways to understand it. My easiest way to answer that question is to avoid the question and say, right now we're learning Rambam.
See, yeah, right.
So
okay.
It's important. Rambam is in the range of acceptable Jewish opinions, right?
Yeah.
The Rambam is the far left when it comes to this issue, right?
Yeah.
You know, and that's the way it is. And if people to the right of him want to disagree, they have absolutely the right to do so, and they do so, right? But I want to make it very clear that no one should deny what the Rambam's opinion was. I've said this many times. What upsets me is not when I hear people promoting opinions that are to the right of the Rambam or more literalistic interpretations. That's cool. That's totally fine. You can do that, and you can go with it, and that's fine. But when you try to claim that the Rambam didn't say what he said, that just, excuse my language, just really pisses me off. You know, because when the Rambam writes what he writes, he gives people to this day who have a more scientifically oriented mind and a more philosophically oriented mind. He gives us grounding in the Torah. You know, I can now open a Chumash and seriously learn it as truth, right? But realize that when there's a story of a talking serpent, right, and a tree of knowledge, that it's not recounting actual historical events. That to me opens it up the story in a tremendous way. Now I could sit and read it and I could learn all kinds of lessons from it. But if you
Right,
start trying to
exactly.
tell me that this actually happened, right, at the way it's described literally in the words, it leads me, like the Rambam says, to crazy beliefs. So to me, the Rambam to this day gives any person who wants to remain faithful, who believes in the truth of the Torah, it allows us to open this book and read it and find truth, right? Even if we look at stories that clearly aren't historic. Does that make sense? You know?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a child, I remember the first time, or the most recent recollection as a child of hearing Genesis and trying to really understand it, and the talking serpent and all these things. And I kept saying that I felt uncomfortable with that because it just sounded like, fables and things that I'd read, from, Aesop's fables and things that I'd read
Right.
in other literatures. And I was saying, but this is what I'm believing and supposed to believe, and this is my religion, but I just don't feel comfortable with that. I've always had this uncomfortable feeling about it. So when I hear Rambam expound on it, I don't feel quite as bad about my feelings about it, if you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
all of a sudden you can say, okay, it does sound very similar to these fables. The difference is that these have true lessons to teach. That doesn't mean that some of Aesop's fables don't also have true lessons to teach. They also
Exactly.
do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just because they're not in the Torah doesn't mean they're not saying things that are true, right? But the Torah is teaching us things that are true. And now when we go back and look at the stories of Bereshit, which we're not doing together right now, but maybe one day we'll learn Bereshit together. The Rambam touched on it way back in the beginning of the book. All of it, you see a lot to learn from the stories, a lot to learn, and those are absolutely true lessons that the Torah is teaching us. But it's not teaching us about talking snakes. There's why did it choose a snake? Why did it? There's tons of things we can learn from. Every word we can learn from.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing to be uncomfortable anymore. In that sense, it's exactly like Aesop's fables, lahavdil, in that sense, right? It's a story. The sour grape story. I had a book of Aesop's fables when I was a kid too, and I still think about the sour grapes.
Yeah.
And it's a real lesson. It's a lesson about true human nature. It's stuff we can learn from, even though it's a talking fox or whatever. I think it was a fox in the grape story, but whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And any yeah, I guess, I mean, if there's no other comments, we could start 31, but it's short, but we may not finish it. So 31. So the Rambam has reiterated many times already his assertion that every mitzvah has a reason, right? Remember, we talked about this too, that there's a school of thought that says, no, you keep the mitzvot because God told you to keep the mitzvot, right? Whether you understand it or not. In fact, we shouldn't even look for the reason. You should do it because God told you. And I don't mean to say that that's not a legitimate school of thought within Judaism, but it's a different school of thought, and it's one that the Rambam did not subscribe to, and he's about to criticize it, right? There's a group of human beings who consider it a grievous thing that causes should be given for any law. What would please them most is that the intellect would not find a meaning for the commandments and prohibitions, right? They think that it's better not to find why the Torah told us to do something. It's better if I just told you the Torah told you to do it because it told you to do it, and that's it, right? God said, it's God's will. He wants you to do that. What compels them to feel thus? Why is it? The Rambam, it's so far from his imagination that this could be correct mode of thought that he has to come up with a psychological explanation as to why people think this way. What compels them is a sickness that they find in their souls. It's a sickness to which they are unable to give utterance. They don't even understand what's psychologically wrong with themselves, the Rambam says, to which they cannot furnish a satisfactory account. They can't even explain what's wrong, but there's something wrong in their hearts. For they think that if those laws were useful in this existence and had been given to us for this or that reason, If this mitzvah had a use in existence, meaning a use on this world, an actual practical use, right? Right? And this is the reason why this law was given. It would be as if they derived from the reflection and the understanding of some intelligent being. They think, well, if that's the case, right, then it must be that somebody must have thought of this and must have said that it has to be this way. If, however, there is a thing for which the intellect could not find any meaning at all, and that does not lead to something useful, it indubitably derives from God, right? In other words, they think that if you're going to tell me this is the reason and that's why we do it, it must be a person, some smart guy thought of it, right? But if we can't understand the reason, then it has to be from God, right? Because God is something that we can't understand. So if we can't understand it, then it must be from God. For the reflection of man would not lead to such a thing. No man would come up with a mitzvah like shatnez, for example, of mixing wool and linen, right? It is as if, according to these people of weak intellects, that man were more perfect than his maker. What they're thinking is that if we give a reason for it, we're somehow denigrating this mitzvah, right? Because we're making it logical, and logic is something that humans have. God is beyond logic. I see a hand going up.
Yeah, could I? Rabbi Steinsaltz has said a number of times in his writings that if I could understand why there was, if you will, a reason for this,
Right.
It is a God that's not worth knowing.
And that's exactly what the Rambam disagrees with.
Yeah, I know. That's
right. That's exactly what the Rambam is disagreeing with right now, right? In other words, remember the Rambam holds reason as the height of everything, right? Making sense of everything is the point, right?
Exactly.
So understanding something doesn't denigrate it. It doesn't humanize it. If anything, it gets it closer to godly, right? So it is as if, according to people, men were more perfect, for man speaks and acts in a manner that leads to some intended end, whereas the deity does not act thus, but commands us to do things that are not useful to us and forbids us to do things that are not harmful to us. But he is far exalted above this, right? That's what they think. The contrary is the case. The whole purpose consisting in what is useful for us, as we have explained on the basis of his dictum, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is to this day, right? It says, which shall hear all these statutes, the chukim, and say, surely this great community is a wise, right? Right? Thus, it states explicitly that even all the statutes will show to all the nations that they have been given with wisdom and understanding, right? That the point of keeping the Torah is that actually in my podcast today, I just read the story of the Queen of Sheba. If I can pull it up for a second, it might be worth reading, because and many commentators, among someone a commentator on a person who teaches Tanakh, named from Israel, from Gush Etzion, Menachem Liebtag, mentioned this in one of his lectures, and I quoted him that the Queen of Sheba story is pretty much the height of Tanakh. Well, why is that? I'm going to read it to you. Give me 1 second. And this is really exactly the Rambam's point. I just have to pull it up so that I quote it right. So she hears that Solomon is wise, right? She comes, and I'm not going to go through the whole story, but what is it that she hears? That she, I didn't, I heard so much about your wisdom, right? And she says, no, your God should be blessed, that he desired you to place you as the king over these people. He made you the king, lasosh, to do justice and righteousness, right? And the appreciation of your wisdom, right? In keeping the laws of God. Right, so when the people of the world, the outside world, come and recognize how intelligent and how much sense what we do makes, right? So now, if there is a thing for which no reason is known, and that does not either procure something useful or ward off something harmful, Why should one say of one who believes in it or practices that he is wise and understanding of great worth? The Torah makes no sense then. The point of the Torah, the entire point of the Torah, according to the Torah, is that the whole world should learn from us and see how wise and how intelligent and how much sense it makes what we're doing, right? Because what we're doing builds, as the Rambam said, a society which works, a society which functions, a society which brings health and goodness and cooperation and honesty to all the people within that society, so that we then create an environment, an atmosphere where we can then step up higher and achieve spiritual greatness, right? So the Torah has to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, how does the whole world look at us and say, if the whole world looks at us and sees us doing things that make no sense, then the Torah makes no sense, right? And why should the religious communities think it a wonder? If other religious communities, here he means people that have other religions, right? Why would they look at us and say, wow, these guys have it together, right? Rather, things are indubitable. I want to say something, right? One of the reasons for the success, the economic success of the Jewish community, say in the United States of America, we came impoverished to these shores when our peoples came in waves over the centuries to the shores. Communities set up organizations which gave out free loans. What Jewish community didn't have a Hebrew free loan society, right? Who didn't have a society where we had a shul where you can come, a place, you can stay here, you can stay there until you get yourself on your feet. I'll lend you a peddler cart so you can sell tchotchkes until you get yourselves on your feet, right? Later on, we had organizations, immigrant aid societies, which helped people find communities to live in, to settle in, right? That's Am Chacham V'Navon, right? That's a nation of wisdom and intelligence. We achieved economic success. We achieved our abilities of living and having what to eat and having a home to live in and a community to be a part of because we followed the laws of the Torah, right? By following what the Torah teaches us to do, we then establish a society where we can then achieve spiritual growth. It makes sense. What we do makes sense. And when we do things like that, we set an example for the world. If we welcome people that are immigrants and we help them and we get them on their feet, right? And we help people who need it and we help the needy and so on and so forth. We keep the laws of the Torah. We're honest in business. We set good examples. We say what we mean and we mean what we say. We bring about a society where people prosper, right? It just makes sense. It's reasonable. It's logical. It makes sense. And then people learn from us how they're supposed to act, right? Then other communities say, that is a smart and intelligent nation that I can be like, right? Rather, things are indubitably, as we have mentioned, every commandment from among these 613 commandments exists, either with a view to communicating a correct opinion, either it's coming to get rid of some silly thoughts like the silly magical and superstitious thoughts that we were talking about before, or putting an end to an unhealthy opinion, right? Or it's coming to get rid of silly ideas, right? No, either to instill in us good ones, or communicating a rule of justice or warding off an injustice. Every single rule of the Torah applies, fits in that one of those categories that I just mentioned, period. Or to endowing men with a noble moral quality or warning them against an evil moral quality. Thus, all the commandments are bound up with three things: opinions, moral qualities, and political civic actions. So the Rambam says every single one of the 613 mitzvos makes sense on a moral and ethical and just level, and a level of truth, right? Now, that's a very tall order, right? He's going to have to back that up with many chapters explaining how every mitzvah fits this. But the idea the Rambam is extremely emphatic about, and he lays it down right here, right? We do not count speeches as one of these things, since the speeches that the law enjoins or forbids belong in part to the class of civic actions, and in part are meant to cause opinions, and in part are meant to cause moral qualities. Therefore, we have limited ourselves here in giving reasons for every law to these three classes. Every single mitzvah that I'm going to explain will fit one of these categories, right? It either teaches us a proper opinion or gets rid of a bad one, right? It teaches us how to develop a society, right, of political and social justice. Or three, right, it teaches a moral quality that's good, or keeps us away from a bad moral quality. So this is how, this is chapter 31, and Rambam kind of lays out his rules. And this, according to the Rambam, is what it's all about. This is the bottom line of the Torah, according to the Rambam. Now we'll see. We'll see whether he achieves what he sets out to achieve as we studied it together. But he certainly believed this very strongly. We went through so many powerful things tonight. It was quite a powerful night. But I guess I'm glad we covered more ground than I expected to. But that's, I guess, a good thing. Any comments before we wrap it up?
Is he gonna cover 613 commandments? So
No, not 613, but he's enough that you'll get the idea.
okay.
You know,
if I check the ones he doesn't discuss,
nothing about this book is ever exhaustive, and the Rambam told us that a million times. He gives ideas and gives us ways to think, shows us how to approach and examples. But it's not an exhaustive book. He leaves most of the work for you to do on your own, so that when you learn Tanakh, you look at a pasuk. He's not going to give you the metaphorical explanation of every single non-historical story in Tanakh, but he gives you permission to think about it that way and tells you that that's how you're supposed to think about it, right? And the same thing with the mitzvot. He won't go through every single one, but he'll give you the instructions on how to look at it. All right. Okay, so this is a pretty strong night here tonight. Thanks for hanging in there this whole time, and looking forward to next week. All right, have a wonderful weekend, a wonderful Shabbos, and thank you so much for participating.
thank you.
Thank you, Saul.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Saul.
Be well.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Saul.
all.
Thanks. Bye.